Okay, so welcome to the next, I believe, sixth uh, behind the screen video. Um, as ever, this is being recorded live on Twitch, well, streamed live on Twitch, and then the recording will be uploaded to YouTube, both Comrade Bubbles channels. The topic for today is trap and puzzle design. You'll notice that my kind of show notes, I suppose, the putting into practice section is identical to the end result of last week's. That's because we'll just be working on the discrete traps and puzzles in, of that sequence, of that dungeon. So the recap, it's pretty swift really. The party, having dealt with the animating trees and shadows of the clearing and lighting the brazier there, decided that they would push on to the last brazier, giving them a 3-day return journey back to the fort. They have enough supplies and stuff for that. They worked it out, and they decided to push on for the last brazier to light it as a proof of their ability as an adventuring party. So they managed to get there. They decided to hunt some of the local wildlife for meat to save on their rations, and to kind of to take a trophy for their as proof of their skill. This was a great chance for me to play up the alien nature of the Shadowfell's fauna. So they fought a weird bear-adjacent creature, which they handled quite well. They're a high damage, low sustain party, so things tend to be over swiftly, and that's fine. They dealt with the quote-unquote bear, skinned it, took what they could from the corpse, and then continued on with their trek through this primordial forest. They got to the fortifications they'd been told about, where the last brazier was, and decided that, the fortifications themselves were run down. They've been abandoned for centuries, but they were all covered in this flower that the party rogue recognized the scent of from a time when he was poisoned by a strange zombie no one had ever seen before. And they decided to burn the flowers. They had burned about half of them before the fighter decided that he would start making work of the dead bodies lying around, and wouldn't you know it, the dead bodies animated. Now, because they had destroyed about half the flowers, the zombies, these mold zombies, they were a disadvantage for everything. So they made really short work of the zombies, and if they had been able to destroy the flowers first, then they would have been stunned, so they wouldn't have done anything. But they defeated all the zombies. They the brazier found the last of the 3 supply caches, took what they could from it, so just more tortures really, and decided to rest up overnight in the ruined fortifications before heading back to the fort the next day. Over the course of the fight, the party rogue once more became infected with this disease, and the fighter also became infected with the disease. Now, since I ran these originally, the book I've got them from, the Kobold Press's Creature Codex, has been through several rounds of playtesting and released. So originally, the only way to remove the disease was restorative magic. I think it was a lesser restoration, which for parties without ready access to things like that, especially when the character doesn't know what's wrong until relatively near the end, it's difficult for them to get to be cured. Thankfully now it just requires 2 successful saving throws at the end of a long rest, so that's cool. and shouldn't be as life-threatening as it originally was. So the plan at the end of the last session was to return to the fort and try to get some payment for their services however they can. The player of the party sorcerer wants the party fighter to get all the credit because the party fighter is a member of of the Knights Arcana, and he thinks it would be a good kind of way into the organization. Their plan is to return to the fort, get paid if they can, and then head out to explore the night market, one of the other locations in this area of the Shadowfell. The night market, sorry, the bone market. What they don't know, of course, is that the fort's going to be under attack when they get there, and then they'll be. I'm not going to force them into undertaking the quest with the dungeon I'm designing. It's all good practice, even if it doesn't get used, but it will be made clear that this is a quest they can do if they want to, or they can do whatever they want. I did work out travel times, and the journey to the dungeon, clearing the dungeon, and the journey back is the vast majority of the rest of their time in the Shadowfell before the portal opens. Now, if they don't do this quest, the Sarasworn and the undead warlock leading them, they will show up on portal day just before the portal opens, and they'll be assaulting the castle, and it'll be a tense encounter where the chance of character death will probably be quite real, but equally the Knights Arcana will probably feel beholden to resurrect them. So there are stakes in this choice that I'm going to be presenting my players. I think that's pretty much everything that happened. So going on to the my philosophy for traps and puzzles. By now you can probably guess the first one. Keep it simple. You don't want to forget how a trap or a puzzle works halfway through. And I've done that, and it doesn't feel great, and kind of the players pick up on it. Now, because this is a 5th edition D&D game, be making some reference to their terminology. The rules classify traps into simple or complex, and that is vague enough and ambiguous enough to work for every system, really. A simple trap in mechanics terms, not in my philosophy terms. A simple trap is one that pretty much has one die or dice roll associated with it, and it's a one and done effect. It might repeat, but it's the pit trap. It's the spikes coming out of the walls. It's the pressure plate with the flame jets attached. That's a simple trap. A complex trap is, again in mechanical terms, is one that has multiple components to it. I think one of the examples given is it's a long hallway and nothing happens until you get to the end of it, and then a glyph of fear is revealed, which if you fail the saving throw against that, you're frightened of it, so you have to run all the way back down the hallway, whereupon the hallway itself activates and you get hammers from the ceiling and blades from the walls and all sorts of things. So that's mechanically. When I say keep it simple, I just mean don't overcomplicate things. Limit yourself to a certain number of moving parts or a limited number of effects. Don't stack things onto one trap. And obviously, use your discretion about what is simple in this context and what effects a trap would have. A lot of the time, they're either going to deal damage or inflict a condition, using 5th edition terms. So they're either going to deal damage or affect the gameplay in some sort of debuff, I guess is the easiest way of putting it for a system agnostic. Whether that's being drugged so that the player character is high, or player character becomes irrationally afraid of something in the glyph of fear example. you know, just kind of for ease of use at the game table, one or two conditions is what I'd recommend at most, purely because keeping track of more than that for players and for you running the game, it can get overwhelming. It can be difficult. Uh, Unlike a lot of my other things, you don't have to tell a narrative with a trap or a puzzle. It helps if it has one, in that it helps if it's tied into the narrative of the dungeon that you're trying to tell, as with the traps that I plotted out last week. But it doesn't have to be narratively consistent with the rest of the area. Something could have come in afterwards, after the trap or the puzzle's been set, and altered it slightly. And if it has, have an environmental clue that this is the case. Have kind of tool marks in the rock around the glyph, or part of the trap floor be exposed where the mechanism has been altered slightly, something like that. Um, a trap at the end of the day, and a puzzle to a certain extent, is designed to. It's not. It has only one purpose, and that is to stop intruders, really. And really, that's the start and end of its narrative beat. Is it's just there, and it does a thing, and it does that thing over and over until it's prevented from doing so. But that's not to say it can't be interesting. And a lot of this, the trap or the puzzle might not inherently be interesting, but its location should be. So if it's in say just a plain room and the players have no way to expect a trap or a puzzle to be in there, then that's not really interesting. But if it's in a room and there's blood sprayed everywhere, ancient murals defaced by years of tomb robbers, um, scraps of decaying fabric and cloth scattered around the floor, and then the players look up and there's a body impaled on the ceiling by the spikes that are slowly descending. That's interesting. It's a simple trap, it's just a ceiling that's lowering. But it's more interesting than just the players enter a room, look up, and there's a spiked ceiling coming down. So that's what I mean by interesting. Make it a mini set piece almost. And you don't have to do this all the time because your players may end up with burnout, but it's a good way to think of traps and puzzles as just a series of dice, as more than just a series of dice rolls. And at the end of the day, if you think about it, all role playing is just a series of dice rolls with some cool narrative on top of them. So you can double down on that for the traps. You want your traps to be memorable. You want your puzzles to be memorable. You want your players to walk away from them thinking that, yeah, we did a cool thing. We did a big thing by solving the puzzle or beating or disarming the trap. And obviously the magnitude of the trap and how fantastical the location it's in is going to be relative, I guess, to the importance of the trap. A locked door to a broom closet with a secret entrance, say, is going to be a lot plainer than the locked door to the treasure vault. It's still a locked door with a room behind it, but the locked door to the treasure vault is probably going to be either A, hidden, which is an interesting fact in and of itself, or B, it's more likely going to be this grand, imposing door of banded oak, with words of warning carved into it in various scripts, and possibly the remains of the last person who tried to pick the lock. So that's what I mean by keep it interesting. While I do like to have threes for everything because it's just how the human brain works, at the minute, I can't think of a third thing to add to this. It goes without saying that they have purpose, so I can't apply the encounter design guidelines. That its purpose is to be a trap or a puzzle to prevent progress. It doesn't have, as I've already said, it doesn't have to make narrative. It doesn't have to have a narrative within it because it's just a trap or a puzzle. I guess if I was to add a third, and if you ever have any suggestions for things like this, let me know in stream chat or YouTube comments. I'll try and get around to reading them. But if I were to add a third, it should be unspoken, but be unpredictable. Mix it up sometimes. Don't have every trap necessarily lead somewhere. It could just be there to divert the player's attention or to as a distraction from a much grander, far more complex trap waiting down the line. Now, sure, you can have traps that kind of, or puzzles that seed the solutions of future traps and puzzles, but don't feel like you have to. And I'll be talking about it when I actually go to the putting into practice stuff. But with traps, my gut feeling is just they do a thing and then they're done and you can move on from them. Puzzles are a little more involved in a way because you can use them to tell story through, and you can use them to you can include environmental clues and revelations about the local environment or the character that built them or the purpose of the location they're found in through the puzzles. Because traps are very minimalist, unless you're doing a complex trap, um, using 5th edition terminology again, they are harder to tell that kind of thing through. Certainly you can tell the stories of previous adventurers through them, as in the examples I've given with the bodies impaled on spikes and the body at the base of a door where they've tried to pick the lock and it's gone horribly, terribly wrong. But don't, and again, this is just me. I'm not an authoritative expert on the subject. This is just how I approach things and my gut reactions to things. Don't feel beholden to use everything as an opportunity for environmental storytelling or for dropping clues about how to solve the puzzle or the trap involved. Do it when it feels right to you, and a lot of it is just instinct and understanding your players and knowing what they pick up on and don't pick up on, knowing what they find easier to understand in a way. But certainly do feel free to throw them a curveball every now and then and have a trap that in a corridor that leads nowhere or that goes somewhere completely wrong entirely. If it makes sense in the context. You don't, well, I was going to say you don't want to be competitive. You don't want to be trying out to kill them or to quote unquote win the game, but some DMs do, and that works for them and their parties and their players, and that's fine. There are so many ways to run tabletop role-playing games that it's incredible, and there's genuinely a game for everyone out there. The difficulty sometimes is just finding it. I think that's all. That's kind of my 3 tenets for this section. And obviously, as I've said before, I will eventually run out of things to talk about in terms of overarching tenets and themes, and I'll revisit topics when I actually put them into practice in my prep for that week. But I think for now I'm ready to go on to the putting it into practice section. So last week I discussed dungeon design and how I approach dungeon design, and some guidelines for creating interesting and cool dungeons, and I use those to construct the example given there. As a recap, the intention is to for the players to infiltrate an undead spellcaster's lair, probably going to be an undead warlock, and each of the traps is kind of designed to teach them about the monsters that they'll find. Sorry, puzzles and traps is designed to teach them about the monsters that they'll find in that lair and around the spellcaster, which I realise flies entirely in the face of what I've said about keeping traps out of the narrative, but in a way that I'm using the traps themselves as environmental clues. So to get into this dungeon, undead spellcaster's lair, they've got to first open the door. The door will be in a wizard's tower, in the vault below it, probably behind a magically locked door, and they'll have to find the key. The key, I'm thinking, will be at the top of the wizard's tower. This tower is destroyed. It's being held up entirely by the fact that it's a magical building, and they'll have to find a way of getting up kind of the floating rocks to the top of the tower where the key is. It might not literally be a key, but it will serve that function. And then along the way, there'll be in the vaults themselves, there'll be a minor trap and a major trap, and then a guardian kind of if they try to take anything other than the key from the building. The minor trap is listed as vulnerability to necrotic damage because it'll be a line of defense from things coming up through the vault into the tower, and a lot of undead, for obvious reasons, are in 5th edition D&D are immune to necrotic damage. So the trap is just to flip that on its head. And I think we'll list it as 1 hour. So if the party at any point have a short rest, that'll just go. I won't tell them how long the effect lasts for, because explore through play is the best way of discovering these things. And I want there to be threat here. This is, although they don't know it, this is quite possibly kind of the boss fight of the entire level. So I want there to be some danger. And then the major trap being the glyph of warding is probably going to be on the entrance to the some drop frames apparently. Anyway, where was I? Oh, bear with me, YouTube. Bear with me. Well, this is awkward. So, this doesn't work. I'll stop. Oh, never mind. Successful reconnection. Just wait for the stream to go back up. There we go. OBS freaked out for a moment, but hopefully it's all good for now. What was I saying? Yes, the glyph of warding is designed as kind of the first line of defense, I think, although I might invert the two traps. In the vaults from the undead coming up through them into the wizard's tower, and it's probably just going to be the standard exploding runes, glyph of warding, maybe change the damage type to radiant damage. Just to, I guess, show the players that this is not anything they've come up against before. This is going to be an immediate reduction in their resources by removing theoretically a fairly large chunk of their health pool, or certainly removing the health pool of whoever triggers the trap. But then give them the chance to heal up afterwards. They do have potions of healing and things like that, so it shouldn't be too much of a resource drain. So I think I'm happy setting that to just explosive runes, but dealing radiant damage instead of standard. And as I say, the guardians there if they want to, or if they try to steal anything. So then they leave the wizard's tower, and it's the wizard's vault. I say wizard, spellcaster of some sort. The tower has been there so long, no one really knows, and I haven't given it much consideration because it's not going to come up. Theoretically, not going to come up. So they'll end up in this cave complex of constantly downhill tunnels. The outer defenses are going to be the kind of the foreshadowing of the stronger creatures, and then as they get through to the actual spellcaster's lair, there'll be just a simple puzzle room, and then more encounter-based traps, I guess. Not really a trap, it was an encounter, to encourage them to be stealthier about their progress. So I'm not sure what the necromantic spell trap will be. It might be a curse. That could work. If there's say a water source running through the cave, and they step in it, then there's some sort of cursed effect. That might be quite cool. Maybe like a hex that the spellcaster could then benefit from later down the line. And it's pretty easy to avoid because they can just step over the water. Yeah. Because this will have a knock-on effects with any ability checks they have to make down the line if I specify the ability being cursed. So if I do hex water source, and then we'll say curse's strength. Just in case the party want to grapple the undead spellcaster. And as just a general aside, if you do use the hex spell, you can grant the target disadvantage on one ability of your choice on ability checks relating to that ability. Most of the time you'll want to pick strength or dexterity purely for the fact that those are the two main grapple opposition rolls, or initiation in the case of strength. Constitution doesn't have any skills associated with it that I recall, and then a case could be made for intelligence and wisdom for kind of memory recall and information. If your players do that kind of thing a lot to gain insight into their opponents, and then obviously the charisma, if they try to talk their way out of a fight, then that's what that's going to hinder. Anyway, I think that's an okay trap. I think we're good there. So moving on to the trap based on the angry. I'm referring to this as a trap rather than a puzzle because it's not really a puzzle. Hopefully they'll pick up easily enough that when they blink, they can kind of feel a slight breeze on their skin that's not there when they open their eyes, because being unable to see the source of the hanger, which is probably just going to function as a rune carved into something. And I'll figure out the berserk condition before it becomes necessary. I might talk about something like homebrewing mechanics next week and figure that out. But hopefully my players can figure out that the door only exists when they can't see it, or the door doesn't exist when they can't see it. It won't be a door as much as a solid wall. It's not an illusion. It is a solid wall when your eyes are open, but when your eyes are closed, you can just step through. So hopefully players will pick up on that, as I say. The lonely is pretty much a replication of the Glyph of Fear example that I gave earlier from I think it's Xanathar's Guide to Everything. They'll find this Glyph of Fear and anyone who fails the check will be scared, so they'll run backwards. So there'll be a hallucinatory rockfall, which probably treat as phantasmal force spell, so it does a bit of psychic damage. They can take because they're utterly convinced the ceiling is caving in on them. And then the trap itself is just a pit trap, and they fall into the pit. Probably won't be spikes in it, purely just through the difficulty of getting spikes in this area of the Shadowfell. I don't know, there might be kind of the bones of those who have come before or have been just dropped into this pit to do a bit of damage, but it won't be. The pit will be quite deep, I think is the main thing. So the damage is more from falling into it than anything at the bottom of it. Now the lonely is the problem. The lonely. Oh, I misnamed. Oh dear. I think this was supposed to be the hungry. Whoops. Fallibility. Woo. Yeah, the lonely. It's going to be a bit harder to quantify, but it is unpredictable in relation to the other traps. And these so far have just been traps. I might rework them after I've gone through this initially to have a puzzle, add another puzzle in. But the lonely it's going to be more role playing and me drawing upon their backstories to create scenarios where they've failed or where someone's blamed them for something. And that's something that I'll probably just do on the fly. But obviously I'll read up on their backstories beforehand. But it's not something I can really prepare in advance. Or that I'm necessarily comfortable with doing that, because I do have a tendency to second guess myself. I kind of think, is this the best that it can be? And that's probably something, or that's almost definitely something I'm not alone in doing as a person or a GM. So after they go through those, 4 traps? 4 very simple traps, apart from the hungry, which I guess would be classified as a complex trap. Get to the inner defenses. Now these were designed to be weaker because everything is designed to keep things out rather than to keep things in. So the wretched shrinking spell, so they probably won't be small. They're probably smaller than small. I think it's tiny. And they'll have to work together to possibly lift a sluice gate kind of thing to activate a water wheel to open the door. That might be cool. Or even better, the source of the shrinking is, again, it's just a permanent glyph, uh, probably on the ceiling, that's illuminating this room. They look up, see the glyph, what have you. They're already shrunk by this point, and they've got to figure out a way to cover it. And they can open the sluice gate to move a water wheel to kind of put a platform of some sort or a covering over the glyph. And as soon as the glyph is covered, they grow again, because they can't open the door they can't open the other door in the room without being able to reach the handle, and they can't go back the way they've come because the door closes behind them. Which, as an aside, I've never understood doors that close behind the party, because how does the door know when the whole party's gone through? But I guess there'll be, even if the door isn't closed behind them, they'll still be too small for anything else in the caves, and they can't grow again until the rune is deactivated. So that's a possibility. I put it. So what was it? Activate water wheel, cover glyph in ceiling, and then open door. This is just based solely on my delight in playing video games where you're shrunk. Obviously, there are loads of Counter-Strike and TF2 maps where everything's scaled up as if you're the size of a mouse, and I love those things. I love it so much. So this is me trying to recreate this experience. Hopefully, the players will go for it. And then, of course, the other line of defense, the other defenses are just roving bands of these Sorrow Sworn creatures. And I'll have the players be able to avoid them potentially. Well, not potentially, the players will be able to avoid them through playing smartly and through hiding, pretty much, if they don't want to encounter these creatures. And then the sanctum itself won't be trapped, or there won't be there won't be any puzzle rooms in them. Because that's just going to be the focus. It'll be the kind of the showdown of the dungeon. So having gone through all of those, I'm now going to go back through them and try and figure out if I can add a puzzle instead of a trap to the outer defenses. See, I like the hexed water source, although thinking about it, what if that's a puzzle? Do some sort of Escher recurring stream thing, and the players get stuck in the loop. But then how would you get out of the loop? That's the question. And how do you get into the loop without realizing it? So they go through this wizard's tower, they get the key, open the door, go through the wizard's traps. Theoretically don't annoy the guardian. Although players, you never know with players, they'll do anything. And then they end up in this cave system, this labyrinthine downhill cave system. To keep the same approach, if you touch the water, you're stuck in the loop until you can get free. But then how do you get free? It being a puzzle, I don't want this to necessarily damage the players. I want them to have to think about it and figure out how to get someone out of the loop if a party member ends up in it. What if there's something subtly different every time they loop? Full disclosure, I'm thinking here of Garth Nix's Old Kingdom books with the bell magic and the rivers of death. So what if the players come to this cavern, and at this point I'm just thinking aloud, so if you do want to suggest any improvements or anything, again, stream chat, YouTube comments, I do read them when I can. So you come to this cave, and there will be rooms in these caves that serve no purpose. It's going to be sort of labyrinthine. Come into this room. There's a wide kind of underground river streaming through it, and along the banks of the river is if I'm stealing from Garth Nix, may as well go whole hog, have some bells hanging, and depending on what loop you're on, one bell is always ringing, but it's a different one on each loop. And to get out of the loop, you have to ring the bells in the correct order, with the loop starting in the room, quote unquote, the real room. I think that could work, and hopefully would entertain my players. And if more than one gets stuck in the loop, if they're on different loops, so to speak, then as long as one of them solves it, the spell will temporarily cease. But it is a necromantic spell trap, and we are stealing from Garth Nix. So on top of all this, so I'll write this down first of all, if I can find my cursor. So looping water source, ring bells in correct order. And then if we say there are 5 bells, no, if we say there are 7 bells going back to Garth Nix, so it'll be 1, 4, 6, 7, 2, 5, 3, with each being the bell number and then the position being the loop number, so to speak, to close loop temporarily. But each time you step into the next loop, your max HP is lowered by 1 until long rest, or by the end of the next long rest. I could treat it as an initiative thing, with people stuck in the loop, they can't move out of it, but they can progress into the next loop or go back up the river, or up the water source. To experiment. Just so I can keep track of what loop they're on. So handling it in initiative probably makes sense, especially if the party is potentially going to be 5-way split. And if they're on the same loop, they can see each other. And if they're not, then they can't. So if it's a wide water source, like a river, not deep, quite shallow, you tread in it, you disappear, you appear to you in a tunnel with bell number 1 ringing. Although I just say that there are bells attached to the sides. One of them is ringing. Now potentially they'll solve this really quickly and figure out that they have to ring the bells and work out the order. Even if they do, whoever does that, their max HP is going below it by 7 at the minimum. So as the water itself drains their strength. So that you're in the tunnel, you can progress down the tunnel to the next in the sequence, or you can progress backwards up the tunnel to the previous sequence. And ringing any of the bells. I think you can solve the puzzle from any of the loops. Just to avoid extreme backtracking, quote unquote. I think that works. I think it's a pretty cool puzzle. It's not tied in any way to the narrative apart from the fact that it's a necromantic thing. But it is something I've never done before. So hopefully the players will be able to experience a moment of surprise about theoretically a cool trap or a cool puzzle to work out. And I'll make it clear that every time they do go down the loop, their max HP lowers by 1. So that they do realise they have to think and they can't just brute force their way through the puzzle. I might do it max HP lowers by 1 every 2 loops. Just in case things run on too long. I don't want to have them being reduced to ridiculously low hit points. Yeah, it adds a bit of bookkeeping on my part, but every 2 loops. I don't want to punish them unnecessarily for taking a long time to figure this out. And as I say, they can occupy the same loop and talk to each other, and they only need one of them to solve it at any time. So I think that's pretty cool. Hopefully that's a pretty cool puzzle. I think that's everything I really wanted to talk about. I wanted to sort out these puzzles, and after I've had time to just kind of have a break and step away from them. Still not sold on the hungry, so I might reread the kind of the narrative of that creature, see if I can figure something else out. Could do that now, I suppose, if I do it swiftly enough that it bores no one. Where am I? This is so the hungry are part of the Sorrow Sworn found in Mordekainen's Tome of Foes. Cool. Just checking the preview hasn't updated with stuff that I probably shouldn't show you, because why would you then buy the book? I've just got to scroll through to the correct entry. Demons, demon lords. Oh, that's devils. Still on devils. Elementals. This is going to make for thrilling viewing or listening if you prefer to listen. Almost there. Sorrow's one. Here we go. So the hungry. Do what is necessary to sate appetites. Greedy devourers consume more life and energy than encounter, stuffing morsels with flesh and drinking in their victims' screams. When they finish, they lurch away while bright eyes resume the search for something else to consume. My initial reaction to that is something along the lines of the Sarlacc from Star Wars mixed with an anglerfish. So, that being said, what if the Glyph of Fear acts as a lure, but the opposite? So they see it, panic. I think we can get rid of the hallucinatory rockfall. I don't think that's needed. But seeing that kind of alerts the creature it's attached to. So rather than a pit, it opens the creature's mouth. And then they run away from the glyph, if any of them indeed fall prey to it, run away from the glyph into this hole that opens up in the passageway behind them, which is this creature's mouth. So this is apart from the spell, the looping water source and the actual combat encounters and the explosive runes, this is the only time they'll be taking any damage. So if I do a dex save to avoid teeth, so each tooth does d6, I guess, piercing damage based on how far they've fallen. Minimum 1d6, because it's not actively trying to attack them, there's no strength behind it. But then they land at the bottom and start sliding down its gullet, so they could do another dex/strength save to halt the fall. And if they fail that, they'll be taking, say, 2d6 acid damage every turn. And turn will be in air quotes because it won't be an initiative order scenario, so it'll just be kind of, oh, you take a tick of damage, you take a tick of damage, you take a tick of damage, until they figure out that how to get back out. I think that works far better than just a boring pit in the floor. And it can be more of, as you see this fear, you turn around, you start see this glyph, and you turn around, and start running from it. That the tunnel quakes and a gaping pit opens in front of you, and before you know it, you're on the edge and you're falling in. And then the series of dex saves if they fail, and down to the next one, and if they fail that, they're in its stomach and they have to climb back out. Or, if it takes a certain amount of damage predicated on them actually attacking it while they're inside it, it'll spit them out. But I think that works far better than the original plan. So thank you for listening to me talk through that. Hopefully it's ended up at a point where you think it's a cool thing that you might put into your own campaign or one shot. But I think I'm good for now. As I say, next week I might talk about homebrew conditions and then talk through the berserk homebrew mechanics and talk through the berserk condition and maybe how I approached class building. But for now, so I think the summary is really what you can see on screen. Keep trap simple so you don't forget what the purpose of the trap or the puzzle is or how to solve or disarm it. Keep it interesting so you don't just repeat yourself, but put it in a fantastical location so that the players A, have some idea of what's coming up, and B, have some idea of potentially how to solve it or how it relates to the rest of the dungeon. you're not necessarily trying to tell a story with a trap or a puzzle. You're just trying to enhance the story that they're currently discovering, and be unpredictable. Put things where you don't think where players won't expect them. In this instance, creature in the floor. Put traps in rooms that don't in corridors that don't go anywhere. Use them as distractions sometimes to divert their attention from things. And hopefully also this isn't any discrete part of the philosophy or of any of the design tips I've previously shared, but talking things out as I'm doing right now really does, well, it helps me and it could help you, even if you're just talking to no one. Talk it out, talk it through to yourself. Vocalizing as a technique is really, really useful. Don't be afraid to talk to yourself. Embrace it, really. At the end of the day, if you do a lot of duologues or more as NPCs anyway, you're just talking to yourself at that point. That's why I try to limit that kind of role-playing interaction. But talk to yourself, talk your own ideas out, and you'll end up with vastly better things. At least in my experience, you will. Obviously, your mileage may vary. But I think that's it, really. I've covered everything I want to cover. I've done everything I want to do with putting into practice. Hopefully my roughly hour-long discussion on the subject has been useful or inspirational in some way. Feel free to take these traps and puzzles whole hog, reskin them, do whatever you want with them. As long as it's useful, I don't really care. As ever, I stream on Twitch at twitch.tv/comradebubbles. I upload these to YouTube at youtube.com/comradebubbles or something along those lines. Giving me a follow on Twitch helps. Giving me subscribing to me on YouTube helps. Interacting in general helps. Twitch chat, YouTube comments, the email comradebubbles@gmail.com. And if you do like this kind of thing, I do run a website focused on tabletop role playing. That's how we roll dice.wordpress.com. That link is always in the description of the YouTube video, and I'll probably try and put it on the Twitch page at some point, where I post articles about role playing and role playing advice, and kind of plot hooks, short vignettes of fiction that you could adapt the characters from as NPCs or as plot hooks of their own. I put up locations that I use in my games with plot hooks and NPCs in those locations, and a variety of other theoretically role-playing goodness. And if you have a WordPress account, you can follow that page for alerts when I update. Try to update that on a Friday. I try to stream on Mondays about the same time. This week was a bit later than I wanted to. And then I'm going to try and put up the YouTube video following Monday, just so I've got some routine that I'm sticking to, and to allow me to kind of prepare fully. So I hope that was useful and inspirational, and you've learned something. I guess that's it, really. Have a good week, and I'll see you next time.